Hello and welcome to the Good Food Institute's webinar on cultivated meat and seafood. My name is Daniel Gertner and I'm the business analyst here at GFI. Today, my colleagues and I will cover the evolving cultivated meat and seafood industry. We'll discuss the commercial landscape, consumer insights, investments, scientific progress, regulatory and public funding updates, and industry outlook. We'll talk about the first cultivated meat products sold to consumers in the United States, cover some of the partnerships formed and facilities built in 2023, review the scientific research published last year, and give a global view of the regulatory landscape. For those of you not yet familiar with the Good Food Institute, we are a nonprofit think tank working to develop the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just food system by advancing alternative proteins. We work across the areas of corporate engagement, science and technology, and policy. We are funded entirely by philanthropy, so if you find the insights and resources we provide useful, please consider donating. GFI's work focuses on feeding a growing population sustainably, efficiently, and safely. Conventional protein production contributes to some of the world's most pressing challenges, such as climate change, antibiotic resistance, pandemic risk, and loss of biodiversity. With global meat consumption projected to rise significantly by 2050, alternative proteins offer a globally scalable solution that can help prevent and mitigate harms from conventional protein production. We focus on making the products consumers love in ways that reduce environmental and public health risk. We do this by sharing open access research, like the report we'll be discussing today, and engaging directly with food industry stakeholders, such as manufacturers, distributors, investors, scientists, and policymakers. This webinar is an overview of GFI's annual Cultivated Meat and Seafood State of the Industry report. We also published State of the Industry reports for the plant-based and fermentation sectors, and webinars are available for those reports as well. I'd like to thank the many GFI team members who contributed to this project, as well as external partners who supported with data and fact-checking. If you'd like to help us make our reports, webinars, and other open access resources as accurate as possible, please tell us about your company by joining GFI's company database, which is accessible on our website, and respond to surveys when we send them out. Signing up for our monthly industry newsletter is the best way to stay updated on our research, which you can also do through our website. Today's presentation is focused on cultivated meat, which is meat grown directly from animal cells. Cultivated meat is identical to conventional meat at the cellular level and can provide consumers with the sensory experience of eating animal meat. As we discuss the cultivated meat industry, we are reminded that innovation doesn't occur in a straight line. In this webinar, we'll cover some of the dichotomies of the cultivated meat sector in 2023. Two companies brought cultivated chicken products to sale in the world's largest economy. Meanwhile, those companies and others continue to wrestle with the difficulties of scaling production beyond limited quantities. Growing public investments in cultivated meat research corresponded with declines in private fundraising. Regulatory approvals in the United States and progress toward approvals in several other countries occurred, but elsewhere, governments attempted to ban cultivated meat's production and sale. At least 10 new cultivated meat facilities opened around the world, yet most companies continued to measure their production volumes in kilograms rather than tons. The cultivated meat industry is in its early stages. 10 years ago, the first cultivated meat burger debuted at an estimated cost of $300,000. In 2023, cultivated meat was approved for sale in two countries, the United States and Singapore. We are at the first stages of cultivated meat's market entry, and we expect the industry landscape, the science, and the products to evolve over time. The cultivated meat sector achieved major milestones in 2023. For the first time, US consumers purchased cultivated meat at restaurants, and cultivated meat broadened into new settings in Singapore, including the first butchery, where it was on display and served in the adjoining bistro. Cultivated meat was introduced to more consumers in more locations than ever in 2023, and progress also occurred in other areas of the industry. Governments around the world signaled continued support for cultivated meat as both South Korea and the UK invested in cellular agriculture hubs. Plus, Japan's prime minister called cultivated meat an important technology for realizing a sustainable food supply. Yet the year was not without its challenges. Funding constraints, difficulties with scaling, and the spread of misinformation all posed obstacles for cultivated meat. Consumer understanding of and openness to these products remain in their early stages. These factors potentially moderated industry activity in 2023. The progress achieved in spite of those challenges is a testament to the resilience of companies, researchers, investors, and others involved in the industry. As I mentioned earlier, 2023 was a landmark year for cultivated meat in the US. We saw the first sales of 2 different cultivated meat products in the country in 2023. On July 1st, Chef Dominique Cren's Bar Cren restaurant in San Francisco became the first US restaurant to sell cultivated chicken with chicken from Upside Foods. That was quickly followed by Chef Jose Andres selling Good Meat's cultivated chicken at China Chilcano in Washington, D.C. These product volumes were limited, but it was an important first step for cultivated meat availability in the world's largest economy. At least 7 new cultivated meat facilities were announced, and 10 new cultivated meat facilities opened in 2023. That brought the total number of cultivated meat production facilities to approximately 21 around the world. These new cultivated meat facilities spanned all 4 phases of the scale-up process. Not only are much larger facilities being built, but the industry also continues to add lab scale and pilot scale facilities, meaning the cultivated meat industry is both expanding and progressing. While it remains to be seen how quickly companies will be able to reach their stated capacities and produce products cost effectively, doubling the number of facilities is a great touch point for understanding the current size of the industry. This is the kind of growth that only an emerging field can accomplish. It underscores the greater opportunity for more production capacity in years ahead if the cultivated meat market is to earn a substantial share of the total meat market. There are now more than 170 companies primarily dedicated to producing cultivated meat, seafood, and dairy. These companies span 30 countries in every major world region. One trend we've seen in recent years is a growing number of companies diversifying beyond end product formulation and manufacturing. Companies are increasingly focused on bioprocess design, cell line development, and cell culture media. This advancement of the B2B ecosystem allows companies to focus on their core competencies and should help the industry lower costs over time. I'll also note that these figures are likely an underestimate. It's common for companies to begin in stealth mode and announce themselves once they've completed a milestone, such as a fundraising round. At least 88 other companies have been active in the cultivated industry through investments, partnerships, or business lines. This includes many of the world's largest meat and consumer packaged good companies. Large company involvement expanded beyond the cultivated meat sector in 2023 into areas like cultivated milk, as both Danone and the Central Bottling Company invested in Wilk. In addition to those investments, the world's largest meat company, JBS, began constructing a $62 million research, development, and innovation center for cultivated meat in Brazil. This continued activity from diversified food companies signals a growing commitment to the cultivated food sector and bodes well for the industry's ability to effectively scale. And now I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Taylor, to discuss cultivated meat consumer insights.
Thanks, Daniel. My name is Taylor Lead-Otley, and I'm the U.S. Consumer Research Lead for the Good Food Institute. Now that Daniel's given us an overview of the supply side of the cultivated meat industry, let's talk about demand. We'll cover what people know about cultivated meat, how familiar people are with the concept, and with names used for cultivated meat in various media and social contexts. We'll talk about people's interest in trying and buying cultivated meat, and we'll talk about why they're interested. We'll primarily focus on consumer demand in the US and Singapore, but there are results from other countries and additional context in the full report. So let's talk about what we call cultivated meat. Now, this is important context because people are exposed to a variety of names for cultivated meat in media. Because of this, a lot of evidence that we have on the state of consumer demand comes from studies where people have been asked about different names for cultivated meat. Now, in our 2022 State of Industry report and on our website, we've shared results from a study conducted by Embold Research for GFI in 2022 on how people perceive different names for cultivated meat. And findings from that research suggest that cultivated meat is the sweet spot term for the industry, that consumers tend to find it clearer, rate it as more accurate, and find it more appealing than other names. This has also been supported by research conducted by GFI and other researchers in 2022 and 2023 in the US, UK, and Singapore. So, what do people know about cultivated meat? Despite all the milestones that the cultivated meat industry achieved in 2023 and all of the media attention it received, it's still a new concept to most Americans. Studies suggest that only around a third of Americans have even heard of cultivated meat, and that very few feel they are familiar with it. We expect both awareness and familiarity will rise organically as companies are able to expand distribution and bring new products to market, and as people and media continue to talk about cultivated meat. But this also shows that companies bringing cultivated meat products to market in the short term will need to work to build awareness in order to generate demand. This is also important context for when we talk about people's willingness to try and buy cultivated meat. The most recent research we have suggests that a large minority of Americans would be willing to try cultivated meat today, and that a smaller number would be willing to buy it. Now, these numbers aren't surprising given the low rates of awareness and familiarity with cultivated meat we just saw. And the fact that more people say they're willing to try cultivated meat than to buy it suggests that many will make decisions based on how it tastes, and most people haven't had the chance to do that yet. We did see some positive signs for demand this year, though. A study by the International Food Information Council is shown in the bottom left bar in this screen. They asked Americans in both 2021 and 2023 how willing they were to try cultivated meat. And they found that number almost doubled from 24 to 42% in those 2 years. This is one of our first apples to apples comparisons of consumer sentiment across years, and it shows a large increase in a very short time. They also found that a majority of people believed cultivated meat would be safe to eat if approved by the USDA and FDA, and they asked consumers this before Upside Foods and Good Meat received approval for sale in the US last year. Results of research from Singapore, where cultivated meat has also been available for longer than in the US, tend to show higher levels of interest in purchase intent. So overall, this suggests that there is some existing demand in the market and that it's likely to increase in time, but also that companies are going to have to explain to people what cultivated meat is and why they should be excited about it in order to drive sales in the long term. Now, research suggests there's a few ways to do that effectively. GFI and Bold Research did research on this in 2022 and found that some messages were very effective at making cultivated meat appealing to more consumers. This included helping them avoid hormones and steroids and antibiotics that can be found in some conventional meats, being more environmentally friendly than conventional meat, and of course, offering the same taste and texture as conventional meat without requiring animal slaughter. So overall, our understanding of consumer demand for cultivated meat is still young. We should expect these numbers to change and evolve in the next few years. But we also see positive signs for demand in markets where cultivated meat is becoming available. Demand will also be highly dependent on consumers' individual attitudes, their demographics, which countries companies are able to achieve regulatory approval and distribution in, and what types of products those companies are bringing to market. We'll summarize findings on this and additional research in the full report. With that, I'll pass it to Daniel to discuss the state of investments in cultivated meat in 2023.
Thanks, Taylor. In this section, we'll look at private investments in cultivated meat, seafood, and dairy companies, and how those investments fit into the broader economic environment. Let's first talk about the broader private funding environment in 2023. Rising interest rates, elevated inflation, and a mixed economic outlook subdued private investments last year. Global venture funding across all sectors fell 42% year over year. That brought funding to its lowest levels since 2017. Climate tech equity investments decreased by as much as 40% year over year, despite the sector receiving significant government support through policies that helped to de-risk and fuel private investment. Investments in food tech startups declined by 61% year over year. Alternative proteins were not immune to these declines, but they also didn't deviate too significantly from these broader trends, with private investments in alternative proteins falling 44% year over year. Private investments in alternative proteins totaled $1.6 billion in 2023. That brought funding over the last decade to $15.7 billion. While these funding levels demonstrate significant progress over the last 10 years, they also underscore the nascency of this sector. For comparison, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, $1.7 trillion was invested in clean energy globally in 2023. That means all-time private alternative protein investments comprised less than 0.1% of last year's global clean energy funding, despite animal agriculture contributing to between 11 and 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Cultivated meat companies raised $226 million in 2023, representing a sizable decrease from 2022. Cultivated meat and seafood is an emerging sector in which roughly half of the companies in the industry were founded in the last 3 years alone. As a result, a small number of deals can significantly impact annual investment totals for the sector. For example, in 2022, nearly half of the year's total investment dollars were raised in Upside Foods' $400 million Series C round. Since advanced companies generally don't raise large rounds 2 years in a row, there is a degree of randomness in any single year's funding totals. The cultivated meat and seafood sector also lacked any funding mega rounds in 2023. The largest deal raised was Mutable's $35 million Series B round, and the 3 largest investments for the year totaled less than $100 million collectively. These are large raises for early-stage pre-revenue companies, but without any multi-hundred-million-dollar deals raised, a much larger number of similarly sized deals would have been required to keep pace with recent years' industry-wide investment totals. So while macro and industry-related challenges impacted lower funding totals, it's not clear that we should put too much stock in year-to-year variation. More investment is certainly needed for the cultivated meat industry to achieve significant growth. But it's also important to remember that the impacts of investments are cumulative. Technical, operational, and scientific knowledge gained as the result of investments in 2022 and earlier benefit the sector in 2023 and beyond. While that's all the more reason to direct funding toward cultivated meat today, it also means that despite the private investment slowdown in 2023, cultivated meat innovation and progress continued to move forward. Cultivated meat is still in its early days. Reaching its full potential requires significant investments in research and development and scaling. As companies continue to innovate and as more talent, research funding, and investments flow into the sector, the industry will be better positioned for success. 2023 also continued the multi-year trend toward a more global cultivated meat industry. North America and the US in particular have historically led the way in alternative protein and cultivated meat investments. But in recent years, other countries and regions have increased their share of investments. While overall totals were subdued along with the broader funding environment and industry-specific challenges, Europe showed relative strength in 2023. Cultivated meat investments in Europe were the highest of any region last year at $120 million. It was also the 4th consecutive year of growth in cultivated meat investments in Europe. The ongoing regional diversification of cultivated meat industry activity is an important trend. As investment and innovation take place in more locations around the world, more local, regional, and national governments will have opportunities to provide support. Plus, the distribution of companies, funding, and technology will help make the entire industry more resilient to future shocks. And finally, it's important to note that various funding models can support the growth of the alternative protein industry. While venture capital and other private investments receive much of the attention and have contributed the most to date, the funding environment is constantly evolving. Non-dilutive and strategic funding and support, such as debt, grants, and government incentives, are essential for companies to lower production costs and achieve price parity as they scale production. To enable alternative protein companies to access such funding, we need creative and collaborative solutions across the private and public sectors. Fortunately, replicable solutions are already being implemented, such as school districts procuring alternative proteins for school lunch menus. And some models have been successfully used in other industries, like government loan guarantees and blended philanthropic financing for renewable energy. As the economic environment changes and the industry matures, we expect to see some of these other funding models grow increasingly important to the alternative protein industry. GFI is conducting ongoing research into the changing funding landscape, and we plan to share some of those insights soon, so stay tuned for those resources. And with that, I'll pass it over to Faraz to cover updates in cultivated meat science and technology.
Thank you for providing those insights on the investment landscape. My name is Faraz Harsini, and I'm the Cultivated Meat Bioprocessing Senior Scientist at GFI. I'm going to share science and technology innovation updates for cultivated meat and seafood industry. GFI's science and technology team has been hard at work developing resources this year. We are also seeing exciting developments in the scientific ecosystem outside of GFI. We continue to track scientific publications in our literature library, including 261 new cultivated meat papers published in 2023. 17 of these came from cultivated meat companies, and 14 described the results of research funded by GFI's grant program. We also added an end product tracker, which currently has 103 entries describing specific experiments measuring the properties of cultivated meat products and prototypes. The Alternative All Protein Project, a network of student groups coordinated by GFI, added 24 new groups to their community in 2023. All Protein Project groups were also involved in launching and delivering 7 official university courses. Our research grants program awarded funding to 6 research teams for new projects on cultivated meat and seafood, totaling $1.9 million. We also launched a new research grants tracker in early 2023 to make it easier to keep up to date with what funding is going on into this area. One highlight, this year we saw $31 million in government funding for cultivated meat, the highest for any year yet. We continue to expand our technical resources, including the publication of 9 new entries in our solution database and 8 new reports related to various aspects of cultivated meat. Cell lines from agriculturally relevant species are a necessary component of just about all research into cultivated meat, and the availability of off-the-shelf cell lines that meet the needs of researchers and companies in this growing field remains an obstacle. However, we saw some promising developments this year as well. GFI APAC conducted a survey to better understand the cultivated meat industry's needs when it comes to cell lines. The result highlighted that pluripotent stem cells from terrestrial animals and myoblasts from aquatic animals are especially in demand and difficult to source. Many companies would prefer spontaneously immortalized lines, and adaptation to suspension cultures was also a highly desired trait. And also, there is a need for more clarity on regulatory guidelines and religious certifications. We continue to see improvements in the availability of cultivated meat relevant cell lines. GFI's cell line database now includes 65 lines, which is up from 41 last year, that can be ordered from either public repositories or directly from the cell line owner. The B2B cell line supply model appears to be gaining traction with companies such as OppoBio, Quest Meat, Roslin Technologies, Pluricells, Extracellular, Multus Media, and Ohio Valley pursuing some versions of this strategy. Cell line development partnerships, such as that between Triple Bar and Umami Bioworks, may also represent a viable path moving forward. Now, several exciting advancements were made in cell culture media development in 2023. In the top left, researchers in Japan showed that nutrients extracted from microalgae could be mixed with growth factors containing spent media to support bovine myoblast growth over several generations, actually. This creative approach also detailed how techniques such as hydrolysis or ultrasonic fractionation can be optimized to extract nutrients from raw materials such as microalgae. which can substitute as more affordable basal media feedstocks. These types of studies will be important for determining the future supply chain of the cultivated meat industry. On the bottom left, researchers in Denmark and Canada used statistical approaches such as response surface methodology and design of experiments to optimize serum-free media formulations. The researchers were not only able to create serum-free media, but also demonstrated that this media performs actually better than serum-containing media. The media supported growth in multiple cell lines and multiple species. These findings provide crucial evidence that serum-free media can perform well when formulated appropriately. It also provides a valuable research plan for others to build on for the development of media for other cell types and species. Finally, a review paper by researchers in the US outlined how to leverage metabolic models and analyses to inform media development for cultivated meat. In the paper, they detail the types of information that is needed to build robust models and which methods can be actually used to help interrogate and alleviate metabolic bottlenecks. Cell metabolism underpins many cost and environmental impact outcomes for cultivated meat, and understanding how cell metabolism can inform media development to maximize feed conversion efficiency is a crucial part of this puzzle. Now, 3D scaffolds created from various biomaterials can play an important role in the process of cultivating meat by helping with oxygen, nutrients, waste transport, and by really providing a structure for the final product. Simple bead-like scaffolds called microcarriers can also help with cultivated meat scale up by providing support during the proliferation phase. A key theme that stood out in many of the scaffolding studies published in 2023 was the strategic use of material derived from plants, fungi, and algae as scaffolds. Historically, many tissue engineering scaffolds have been made from animal proteins, such as collagen. And when you think about it, this makes sense, as one role of these proteins is really to provide a site for cells to bind to in the body. So it's no surprise that proteins like collagen have excellent adhesion properties. However, we are seeing increasingly more number of studies that show that with a little effort, such as through comprehensive screening or by treating the materials in certain ways, one can get plant, fungal, and algal proteins to display adhesion properties and other behaviors we are looking for in any scaffold. For example, Teo et al. Examined the prevalence of the RGD motif, which is a motif or a sequence of amino acids important for binding of animal cells to their surrounding in plants and fungi, and identified species with high RGD percentages as promising scaffold candidates. They then investigated protein extracts from high RGD species of fungal as scaffold materials and found that these compared favorably to the animal-derived proteins fibronectin and collagen. Perrault et al. Used decellularized corn husk and jackfruit rinds, which are waste streams from the food industry, as microcarriers for bovine and quoll muscle satellite cells. In 2023, Good Meat received clearance from both FDA and USDA, paving the way for obtaining more regulatory approval and production in larger scales. In their dossier, they showed that their cultivated chicken has similar nutritional attributes such as total protein content, fat, and carbohydrates as conventional chicken. In 2023, VOW, a cultivated meat company based in Australia, also received green light by Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, that their product is safe to eat. Now, Food Standards Australia New Zealand conducted a comprehensive hazard and risk assessment covering microbiology, biotechnology, toxicology, nutrition, and dietary intake. Their published report in December 2023 concluded that the cell line is genetically stable, microbiological hazards are low, and there are no safety concerns regarding exposure to production process substances or food allergenicity. There was no detected gluten, and there were no identified nutritional risks. This is a very positive news for cultivated meat industry. Overall, both products are made without antibiotics, contain no detectable heavy metals, and are free from common foodborne pathogens such as E. coli and Salmonella. Another aspect of cultivated meat production is focusing on the flavor. Now, adipose or fat tissue is crucial to the flavor of meat products. Recent research showed that bovine adipose-derived stem cells can differentiate into fat cells, and that by adjusting the fatty acid composition of the cell culture media, the cells could create the qualities of real muscle fat. However, growing tissues continues to be a challenge in the field of cultivated meat and also regenerative medicine, which brings us to another research development where scientists developed a method to produce macro-scale fat tissues suitable for food applications. In this method, fat cells were first grown on 2D surfaces, and then they formed 3D tissues after the cells underwent adipogenesis. Now, as the cultivated meat industry matures, it's becoming more routine for papers to report nutrition profiles and other product properties. And to make it easier to track these data points, we added a new product tracker to our end product tracker to our cultivated meat library. Finally, in the realm of bioprocessing, the main areas to be tackled by researchers, investors, manufacturers, and suppliers are cost and availability of media and media components, as well as bioreactors, and using food grade and fit for purpose materials and equipment. In 2023, the field of cultivated meat bioprocessing saw several key developments. A techno-economic analysis by ARC Biotech highlighted the feasibility of using current biomanufacturing technologies for larger scale cultivated meat production, projecting a production cost of approximately $29.50 per pound. The analysis proposed 4 main strategies for reducing production costs: reducing media cost, improving biomass yields, optimizing the bioprocess, and utilizing larger bioreactors. According to the report, the media is the main cost driver, and the cultivated meat to reach cost competitiveness, it is essential to reduce the cost of media to around $1 per liter. The report also highlights the importance of production in scale that reduces the cost and depreciation of equipment. Cultivated meat field also saw developments related to each challenge that I just mentioned. Here is one example of each category. So researchers in Norway and the Netherlands improved the cost effectiveness and efficiency of cultivated meat by optimizing media and cell culture parameters, achieving up to 38 days of skeletal muscle cell expansion in a bench scale bioreactor without fetal bovine serum. In another study, researchers in France developed a technique that allows growing cells in 3D in suspension. Unlike many techniques involving scaffolds, this method is scalable and utilizes a high throughput microfluidic encapsulation technology that encapsulates human pluripotent stem cells in an alginate hollow microcapsule. Cultivated meat also saw development in the realm of computational biology and modeling. Shear stress caused by rotor in stir tank bioreactors is a challenge in scaling bioreactors, as it can damage the cells and negatively impact the cell growth. researchers successfully built a computational model that examines the impact of mechanical stress on the cells on microcarriers in a stir tank bioreactor, and their model aligned with experimental data. This simulation was the first step in building comprehensive models that can improve biomass production and reduce cost by informing bioreactor design and culture condition optimization. Now, next, you will hear about updates related to government and regulations.
Thanks, Faraz, for that science and technology insight on cultivated meat products. I'm Mackenzie Battle, and I'm a regulatory attorney here at the Good Food Institute on the Policy and Government Relations team. I'll be highlighting some regulatory developments from the past year. I'll start with Australia and New Zealand. In early 2023, Vow Foods became the first Australian cultivated meat company to apply for product approval. And in December 2023, Food Standards Australia New Zealand, or FSTAN, concluded its scientific risk assessment of Vow's application and has since moved on to conduct public consultation. In its first call for public input, FSTAN proposed that cultivated meat products be labeled as cell cultured. While the regulatory approval process for Vow Foods' cultivated quail product is ongoing, the completion of the FSTAN scientific review is an encouraging step forward for cultivated meat in Australia and New Zealand. Now I'll move on to the European Union. The European Commission plans to regulate cultivated meat under its novel foods regulation. Under this regulation, companies will need to apply for pre-market product approval. The pre-market review process will include a safety evaluation by the European Safety Authority, or EFSA, which entails a thorough evidence-based assessment of the safety and nutritional value of the cultivated meat product, and the EU anticipates this will take at least 18 months. The European Commission and representatives from each of the EU member states will have the authority to grant final approval of a product after EFSA's evaluation. And if granted, the approval will apply across all of the EU member states. Throughout the EU member states, attitudes towards cultivated meat vary, and a range of developments reflected that variation in 2023. So for example, in 2023, Romania, France, and Italy each proposed or implemented countrywide bans on cultivated meat products. In spite of these bans, there does appear to be widespread consumer support for cultivated meat in Europe, as evidenced by studies from the Smart Protein Project in 2023 and GFI Europe in 2022. None of the proposed or implemented bans have been approved by the European Commission at this time. The Swiss regulatory process is similar to the EU's in that it includes a robust evidence-based process for determining novel food safety. Companies should apply for product authorization from the Federal Food Safety and Veterinary Office, or FSVO. In 2023, Israeli-based company Aleph Farms submitted the first ever application to sell cultivated meat in Europe to Swiss regulators. The Swiss authorization process includes a safety assessment and toxicological studies and is anticipated to take at least 12 months. FSVO provides a template for novel food applications on its website to help companies navigate this process. So in 2023, Israel continued to be a leader in supporting cultivated meat, and in January of 2024, Israel became the third country in the world after Singapore and the US to approve a cultivated food product for commercial sale, and it became the first country to advance the approval of a cultivated beef product. Israel is home to several cultivated meat companies and regulates cultivated meat products under its novel foods regulatory framework. South Korea's current regulatory structure allows for cultivated meat research and development, as well as tasting events, but until recently, it did not allow for the commercial production and sale of cultivated meat products. In July of 2023, the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, or MFDS, made progress in enabling novel foods, such as cultivated meat, to enter the Korean market through amendments to the Enforcement Rule of Sanitation Act. These amendments brought cultivated meat and seafood within the scope of pre-market authorization. In February 2024, MFDS also established procedures for recognizing food ingredients produced via cellular agriculture and began accepting applications from companies for the regulatory approval of cultivated meat products for the first time. And finally, I'll provide some brief additional updates on a few other countries before discussing the United States. So after becoming the first country to approve the commercial sale of cultivated meat, Singapore has continued to champion cultivated meat products. As of 2023, Singapore is continuing to work on a food safety and security bill that will offer even greater clarity about regulatory frameworks for novel foods such as cultivated meat. In the United Kingdom, the Food Standards Agency issued new guidance for business in 2023 directed at England and Wales on cultivated meat products, which it calls cell-cultivated products. And Aleph Farms became the first cultivated meat company to file for a product approval in the UK in 2023 as well. Finally, Canada in 2023 provided more clarity about how it will regulate cultivated meat products under its existing novel foods regulations. So Health Canada will require companies to submit a pre-market proposal with detailed product information. And after that point, Health Canada will aim to conduct a safety assessment of the product within 410 calendar days. Now moving on to the United States, in July of 2023, the US became the second country in the world to approve the commercial sale of cultivated meat. Both Good Meat and Upside Foods successfully completed regulatory requirements from the US Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, and the US Department of Agriculture, or USDA, to obtain their respective product approvals. USDA and FDA share regulatory oversight of cultivated meat products. FDA regulates all products up through the point of harvest, which is the point when the cell material used to create cultivated meat is harvested from the bioreactor in which it has been growing. From that point onward, USDA regulates cultivated livestock, poultry, and catfish products throughout any additional processing, packaging, and labeling. But FDA retains jurisdiction over cultivated seafood apart from catfish and cultivated game meat. To complete FDA's pre-market consultation process, Upside Foods and Good Meat submitted data and information to the agency to demonstrate their cultivated chicken product safety and to describe the production process. FDA then informed the companies that it had no questions or concern about the safety of their products by issuing a no questions letter. These letters and further documentation about both companies' product safety are available on FDA's website. And FDA is expected to publish draft guidance for industry on the pre-market consultation process for cultivated meat by the end of this year. Since Upside Foods and Good Meat were seeking to sell cultivated chicken, which is a poultry product, they also needed to obtain USDA approval. So to do so, each company applied for a grant of inspection from the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service. Before granting these, USDA performed a comprehensive review of each company's facility where the cultivated chicken products were being created to verify that each company's product was safe, wholesome, and unadulterated. And finally, I'll address labeling of cultivated meat products in the US. So neither USDA nor FDA has published labeling requirements for cultivated meat products yet, but both agencies have solicited public comments on labeling and nomenclature. FDA will have jurisdiction over the labeling of cultivated seafood apart from catfish and cultivated game meat. All food labels regulated by FDA must not be false or misleading. FDA does not pre-approve product labels, but it may exercise enforcement authority against labels that are found to be false or misleading. USDA will have labeling jurisdiction over cultivated livestock, poultry, and catfish products, and unlike FDA-regulated labels, USDA labels must be pre-approved by the agency. USDA is expected to issue a rule on the labeling of meat and poultry products made using animal cell technology in May of this year. But until they finalize labeling requirements, they will approve labels on a case-by-case basis. And now I'll pass it on to Michael to discuss public funding.
Thank you, Mackenzie, for those important regulatory updates. I'm Michael Carter, Policy Specialist in Diplomacy here at GFI, and I'd like to discuss global public investment in cultivated meat, where we're at and where we're going. 2023 was a good year for public funding, with support for cultivated meat and for alternative proteins generally increasing across the globe. We saw steady progress from governments in recognizing cultivated meat as a key technology and providing the field with R&D and much-needed commercialization support to begin building the business case. Three of cultivated meat's top supporters in 2023 were the United Kingdom, Japan, and South Korea, which funded necessary research and development through grants, consortia, and facility construction. The UK not only announced a new cellular agriculture research hub, but also included cultivated meat in a whole-of-government plan to develop the domestic biotechnology sector. Meanwhile, Japan awarded a large grant to cultivated meat company Integriculture to support its development and commercialization, while South Korea funded the construction of a cellular agriculture hub to help local researchers and entrepreneurs test products. While most public funding for cultivated meat has focused on foundational research, these kinds of government support for development and scaling fill an important niche. Overall, the global community of supportive governments not only expanded in 2023, but deepened its support for the technology. Many leading countries made additional commitments in 2023, including first-time commitments from Denmark and Estonia. The Netherlands remains the top supporter of cultivated meat, funding 2 additional research projects on top of last year's $65 million Cellular Agriculture Netherlands program, while the United States and the United Kingdom have jumped ahead to numbers 2 and 3 on the list. Singapore and Israel, longtime leaders, round out the top 5. While China does not publicly disclose investments in research and commercialization, reporting indicates that government policies have created a favorable environment for cultivated meat companies, indicating a significant level of support. Policymakers supported cultivated meat for many reasons, both global and domestic. Cultivated meat is an important technology for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, as recognized by the Prime Minister of Japan in a speech last year, and investing in its development can improve the quantity, quality, and sustainability of food available to the world's growing population. At the same time, cultivated meat can support local economies, domestic food security, and other national priorities. Governments, including several U.S. states, made investments in cultivated meat research and development to support job creation and the development of a future industry, realizing the benefits of early investments in the field. In addition to direct investments, the world's largest economies included alternative proteins, including cultivated meat, in a slew of national plans intended to promote the development of biotechnology more generally. The first country to do so was China, which in 2022 released the 14th five-year plan for bioeconomy development, which featured cultivated meat and other alternative protein sources as key areas for development. 2023 reporting indicates that the cost of bioreactors is more competitive in China than in North America or Europe, potentially due to government investment and other friendly policies under the 14th five-year plan. In 2023, both the United States and the United Kingdom released plans to bolster their own biotechnology sectors, citing the importance of early investments in a field that could revolutionize food, fuel, pharmaceuticals, materials, and more. The UK's National Vision for Engineering Biology mentions cultivated meat explicitly and calls for investment in research, development, and infrastructure. The White House's bold goals for US biotechnology and biomanufacturing similarly highlights the necessity of developing alternative protein technology, with chapters from the Departments of Agriculture and Energy calling out APs and the need for further investment. However, despite all the good news and major announcements in 2023, global public investment in alternative proteins still falls short of the mark. Governments play a crucial role in developing and deploying new technologies, especially on the timeline needed to address global challenges like climate change and food insecurity. A global innovations needs assessment finds that APs can deliver these benefits only if governments adopt and maintain a level of support comparable to other essential developing technologies. GFI estimates that in 2023, governments provided less than 4% of this recommended support. In 2024 and beyond, policymakers should continue to provide essential research and development funding, support the private sector in building a domestic workforce and infrastructure, and include cultivated meat and alternative proteins generally in plans to invest in promising new technologies and essential global and domestic solutions. Thank you for your attention, and I'll now pass it back to Daniel for the outlook.
Thanks, Michael. With that, let's take a look at what lies ahead for the cultivated meat sector. Cultivated meat remains a nascent industry where individual developments and setbacks garner outsized reactions. Yes, significant advancements must occur for companies in the space to deliver large quantities of cultivated meat at reasonable prices. At the same time, cultivated meat remains one of the most promising approaches for allowing consumers to satisfy their growing appetite for meat while limiting the negative impacts of its production. So what does the future hold for the sector? Regulatory approvals, increased public funding, and process scale-up characterized the cultivated meat sector in 2023, and those factors will continue to drive the direction of the industry in 2024. Multiple products are slated for regulatory approval in several countries around the world in 2024, meaning more cultivated meat will likely be sold this year than in any other year to date. At the same time, the private funding market will probably remain tight. Some cultivated meat companies will access the financing they need to grow their businesses, but they'll do so in a less conducive environment than in recent years. As a result, it will be increasingly important for governments around the world to step up to support the growing cultivated food sector. And companies will need to continue to refine and scale their production processes to increase volumes and lower costs. More facilities are slated to open in 2024, and the potential near-term production volumes of cultivated meat are small relative to conventional meat, even in the most optimistic scenarios. But even if only a handful of companies reach the stated capacities of their facilities, it would represent sizable growth from today's product volumes. So will the cultivated meat sector grow to reach $5 billion by 2030 or $122 billion by 2050? Meeting even the low-end estimates listed here would require notable advancements in production efficiency, costs, and capacity. Several countries would need to approve a large number of cultivated meat products, and the products would need to be affordable and accessible to consumers. Given the current environment, significant growth from today's market size is possible, but it necessitates levels of public and private investment many times higher than today's norms. But the opportunity for the cultivated meat and alternative protein markets is vast. Considering the size of the $1 trillion global meat market, significant increases in support for alternative proteins are justified by their potential climate, public health, and food security benefits. Cultivated meat companies need to continue to innovate to scale production, bring costs down, and ensure a fair regulatory landscape. While the private funding environment, health of individual alternative protein companies, and media sentiment are constantly changing, the challenge before us is not. Animal agriculture accounts for between 11 and 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and meat consumption is expected to grow by 50% from 2012 levels by 2050. If governments, companies, and investors are serious about improving food security, reducing emissions, and achieving climate goals, they must dedicate more research and funding toward alternative proteins. So thank you for tuning in to our presentation on cultivated meat and seafood. We're optimistic about the future of cultivated meat as an agricultural innovation with implications for planetary and public health, strong bioeconomies, and a more resilient global food supply. But we know there's a long road ahead. We need investments in research and development and equipment, fair regulatory frameworks, continued product innovation, and consumer buy-in. If you're involved in this ever-changing industry, please sign up for our newsletter to stay updated on GFI resources and events. As a reminder, there are 2 more webinars in this series focusing on the plant-based and fermentation sectors, and we invite you to watch those as well. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.